This afternoon, we're interviewing Carlos L. Asher. Carlos was born in Great Bend, Kansas on February the 7th, 1924. He served in the United States Army Air Force from July the 25th, 1942 until June the 3rd, 1946. He achieved the rank of second lieutenant, and he served with the Army Air Force Medical Corps. He received the American Campaign Medal and World War II Victory Medal. He was administrative officer in the medical division of the Army Air Force. Today is Election Day, November the 6th, 2012. We're at the Clifford Thompson Post, American Legion in Troy, Ohio. This interview is being conducted by Bob Shook and Paul Holt as part of the Veterans History Project of the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress, and under the sponsorship of American Legion Post 43 for the Miami County Veterans History Project. Good afternoon, Carl.
Good afternoon.
Nice meeting you.
I hope that's the same for me.
Okay. I'd like for you to start right at the beginning, when you're born and so forth, a little bit about your mom and dad, family, anybody in the family else who was in the military along the way, and then proceed up through your education and into the military service. If you'll do that, right on down. Thank you.
Well, no one else in my family was in the service. I did have some brother-in-laws that had served for a time. I was born on a farm near Great Bend, Kansas. I was number 6 of 8, and grew up with 5 older sisters, and was on the farm most of the time during that time of growing up. Went to school, country school nearby, that my father and all my sisters had also attended, and 2 younger brother and sister also attended. So we all attended District 71 Country School, and then went on to school in Great Bend, and worked mostly on the farm. I can remember Pearl Harbor Day when I was working with some friends of mine putting up hay. We came in at noon, and Roosevelt came over the radio and announcing that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and I knew from that moment on that the world would never be the same again, and it never has been. So that's the way it started, and I was about 18 years old. After graduating from high school, worked for a while in the office of a packing company locally, as well as helping out with the farm stuff. And then when I was a little past 18, I volunteered to go into service because I wanted to volunteer for the medical service so that I didn't have to be a combatant but could help in that fashion. And I was inducted July the 25th, 1942, Camp Robinson, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and then was sent to Camp Robinson, Arkansas for basic training. And I remember our first duty there, the taste of Army is that I had to bend over, along with the rest of us there, and pick up cigarette butts. So you can understand why I have never felt too kindly since that time about smokers and where they put their butts. I was, well, they run you through all kinds of tests, and I qualified for officer school at that time. The colonel called me into his office and said that he thought I was too young to go to school, so he kept me at Camp Robinson, and I joined the cadre there for training others that were sent there for to be trained for the medical aspect of the Army effort. And I was there for a considerable amount of time, and then was transferred out to other units, and those, I don't remember exactly all of those units, but they were smaller units that were assigned, but I was always a part of the medical aspect of it. This continued on until in about, I think, well, I was about 20 years old or so, and I qualified again for officer training school, so they sent me to Camp Barker, Texas, for that training as a medical administrative officer. At the time, we were being trained for service in Europe, and had that continued on, we would have been a part of the battalion assigned to each unit, and provided the aid, or called a battalion aid station. On that, we were staffed with a MD and an administrative officer, which would have been me, and then non-commissioned officers and privates. Our job was to take care of folks, get them in shape to go back to the main hospital or return to battle. But by the time we got finished, that had ended, so we were all sent from different places, and at that time I was sent to Marsh Field in California, which was an Air Force base, and then later I was transferred to a Lemoore Army Air Base, which was a small base kind of in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley, near Fresno and Lemoore, and I was assigned to be the supply officer there. And I was there until after the war. I was scheduled, when I was there, had all my shots and everything to go to the South Pacific. But then in that time, Japan surrendered, and I was transferred to a base hospital north of San Francisco, and served there until in May or June of 1946. And that completed my career service. After...
Before you go on, Carl, what did an administrative medical officer do
Well,
in a combat situation?
I would have taken place of the MB if he'd have gotten shot or dismembered. But to tell you the truth, I don't quite remember what our duties were, except I knew that if something happened to the doctor, I would be the one that would be in charge of that unit until there was a replacement. But our job would have been to get the wounded in, and then to take care of them best we could so they could get transferred back to a base hospital somewhere.
Well, did you handle records or something like that? For example, if I was taken to a base hospital from gunshot wounds or whatever it may be,
Well,
you would have, how'd you keep track of me?
finally, strangely, I don't remember that because we never got a chance to practice it.
Okay.
But while I was in training, it was, as usual, pretty rough. The discipline was very strict, and we had, I think, a lieutenant who had a way of making himself uncared about because he was always hollering at us for something. In that time, I'm not sure why, but I was selected to be the student commander of that unit, so I had the pleasure of getting them out on the field for inspection and whatever else, and that was quite a job, I thought, and wasn't sure why they picked me, but they did, so that was okay too. So it was a good experience for me.
Well, you moved around the United States quite a few times, and from most of the service that was spent on the east or western Mississippi.
Yes, well, like I say, one unit I was with, we spent some time in Louisiana for a while. I was always with the medical unit that was attached to whatever else we were in. One was, I've forgotten what it was, but I know we were sent to Louisiana to help clean up something, usually the bases, and then I think we went over into, it seemed like Arizona we were there for a time too. And then I was attached to an engineer battalion whose was called a MAP division. And I was there, and it was from when I was there that I was then qualified for officer training school again. and left there, but
Well, what were these medical, how many people were assigned to this medical unit, and what they were staffed with, what kind of equipment, so forth?
well, like I said, for some reason that has escaped my memory, because I never really got to use all those tools.
But what were they? Do you
Well-
remember? Well, how many people, first of all, how many people were in your unit?
I don't know that exactly. I would suppose there'd be maybe 15 or so in the unit.
Maybe the size of a squad or something like that.
Well, to be honest, I just don't remember
Okay.
the size of it. It's not unlike what we trained when I was at Camp Robbins in Arkansas, when we trained people how to carry the litter and how to get the wounded back and all things that are associated with that. And that was mostly it, just making sure that people got the care that they needed to get back to where they needed to be or whatever.
Well, how'd you move if you were in a combat situation, how'd you move that hospital unit, or wherever it was,
Well,
first aid unit around?
I think we had an ambulance type thing.
You had ambulances?
And some Jeeps. I don't remember anything else. And it wasn't quite like, what's that TV program?
MASH.
MASH. It wasn't quite as elaborate as that. But I guess maybe you need to look at MASH and you could see kind of the facsimile of what we were supposed to be doing.
Well,
Sounds like I didn't have to do very much.
well, no, when you transferred from these post to post, or base to base, did you go by, you were in the Army Air Force, did you fly, or did you always go by some ground transportation?
The only time I flew was at one time when I was at stationed at the Lemoore. I got an order to take some medicine we had over to the California coast to a place, base is below Los Angeles there somewhere. Can't remember quite which one it was. But I was flown over there by a pilot who had to do his training missions. So it was an open cockpit
type.
plane. And while he was up there, he did a few loopy-loops and stuff and got me there and back. And then another time, I, for some reason, had to go to San Francisco, and they flew me and some others up in what they call the Goose, the Flying Goose. I don't know if it was a seaplane or what, but it was an old-fashioned one. You sat on the side, but it wasn't anything fancy. That's the only time. And actually, I was stationed in Wisconsin and Texas, and then a few times in those other places when we moved around, and then California. And that was it.
And they got you ready, though, both go to Europe and also the Pacific, too?
Yeah. And I was, again, something came up and I never went to either place. What was I going to say? Something or other about that. Usually also when I was transferred, I always traveled alone. One time they moved our unit by train, where we, I don't know where it was from where, I don't think it was Wisconsin, clear to, where was it, Texas somewhere, a whole unit, somewhere, but the whole unit moved, and it was such a imperative thing that every time a freight train come along, we had to pull off the side and let them go by. I think it took us about 5 days to get across Texas. That's the only time I remember going, but otherwise I was always going alone, and usually always by train to my next assignment.
Was it, when you went to the next assignment, were the same personnel there, or a new unit?
Usually a new unit.
New unit, so you were switched among units?
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. I never stayed alone.
Well, this is what Carl looked like as a lieutenant in the United States Army Air Force. Now, some of the younger people are going to wonder, well, I thought the Air Force had blue. This is when the Air Force was still part of the Army, and it's called the United States Army Air Force. And you'll notice the lapel markers on there are the medical corps that he belonged to.
I think they call those caduceus or something like that. But don't ask me to spell it.
Well, now,
Pretty good looking, isn't it?
yeah, right, yeah. That's when you were nice and young, Carl. Now, come
That was
on.
when I was 18,
Yeah.
22.
Now,
Another thing, when I was stationed at San Francisco, that had been a large hospital. It was a place, I think, I don't know if the base is still there or not, but the hospital closed. But it was built and used where they brought the people back from the Pacific. They flew them back to that hospital, and then they did whatever they needed to do before they sent them somewhere else. I don't know where they sent them. But I can remember one time getting a request. In fact, there's one of the, I don't know, it was MacArthur's staff or whatever stopped, and they needed some medicine of some kind, and I was able to provide it for them, so I thought that was kind of nice to meet one of the top brass from the Pacific. And so, you know, we kind of cooperated, that kind of thing needed. Also, the fellows came back from Pacific, they always had these nice wool blankets that had been made in Australia. And we had accumulated so many of those from that time that they did that, that we had warehouses stacked full of those Australian blankets, but nobody knew what to do with them. So maybe off camera, somehow it was okay for us to take some. And a couple that I brought home is in the museum here in Troy now. I donated that to and those blankets are just as good today as they were the day that they came from Australia.
well, how'd they get those? Were they issued to the troops in the Pacific, you mean, or what?
No, I think that when they transported them, that's what they covered them
Covered
with.
by the ships.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they were warm, but we had thousands of blankets.
Tell me this, did you have a lot of malaria cases? A lot of people in the Pacific have malaria.
No, well, by the time I got to the hospital, it was pretty well over.
Okay.
So they were no longer bringing people. I'm not sure, because I was the supply officer there in charge of that department. I think I had 27 people. I think most of them were Army personnel working with me. I was only there for a short time before I was discharged. But our work was pretty well over with that. And to be honest with you, I never got much into the hospital itself. I was always where I was supposed to be with running that department. So it was a nice experience.
So now you were discharged on June the 3rd, 1946, and you were discharged where again?
Well, I was discharged at Camp Beale, California.
And where is that?
Don't ask me where that is.
Near San
Because I
Francisco
got
or
on the
LA?
base and I forgot even how I got there, and I was discharged from there and went home. I think I maybe took the train home. That's what I remember,
And so,
just like that. Then I was stripped of my second lieutenant commission and I think
your permanent rank sergeant, isn't it?
sergeant. If I'd have stayed in service, I'd have gone back to that anyhow, and then could have started over probably.
Well, now, when you left there, did you go home by train, you think? Is
I
that?
think so.
And now you return to where?
Well, while I was in the service, I was stationed at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and met a woman there, and we married later. And so at the time of discharge, I was living near Lemoore down at Hanford, California in the desert. So I went down there. And then from there, she was teaching school there. From there, we came back to Wisconsin, and I started college. Because while I was in service and following, my intention was eventually to go into the ministry. A lot of us chose that field because we thought that we might help save the world. only to discover sometime later the world wasn't very interested in that aspect of our duty. But anyhow, that's what happened. I went to, we moved back to Wisconsin, and near Janesville, Wisconsin, Whitewater. There's a University of Wisconsin, university there. It was a state teachers college. And I went college education there. And then from there, I went to seminary in Evanston, Illinois, at Garrett Theological Seminary, which is located on Northwestern University campus, and graduated from there in 1953. What was nice about the college, so many of us, even at my age, a lot of us have died off, of course, but you find us with college degrees and graduate degrees because of the GI Bill of Rights. And I went to all of college and part of seminary on that Bill of Rights. I don't know that I could have done that without it. So that was a wonderful thing, and I think it certainly helped to bring people into the job market that has resulted in a pretty good period of our history where people prospered pretty well.
You graduated when, Carl?
And I graduated college in '49 and seminary in '53.
You mentioned the GI Bill of Rights. Be a little more, explain that a little bit more for people who would may not understand what you're talking about. What was that?
Well, what it did was, I imagine it, I don't know if the government maybe reimbursed the colleges and universities. I don't know about that. I know whatever the college charter was paid for through that bill, and also we got a stipend, and I don't know what it was. Was it a couple $100 a month that helped? And at the time when I started, I also started preaching part-time at small country churches, and my wife at the time also taught school part-time, so that's how we made it. So it was really, really good way. And what the colleges also did was they gave us a semester's credit for our service. I don't know if they're doing that today or not, but that was really a nice thing to do. So I actually finished in 3.5 years. So, and everybody got that. That was a nice feature of it.
You went to the seminary after you graduated from college on the GI Bill.
Part of it, yeah.
What religion were you going for? Did you
Well,
make
I
a
was brought
decision
up
at that time or
Yeah,
not?
I was brought up a Methodist, and that was a Methodist school, and that's what I followed into that and served Methodist churches for a time. And then when we got into the 50s and things, kind of, I would say, somewhere around the Beatles started to show up on the scene. Things began to change, the move of the country, whatever. And a lot of us young fellows that come out of service were getting kind of rested because things didn't seem to change. And so many of us left full-time ministry and took up other careers and teaching or whatever else we wanted to do, counseling. I ended up starting doing alcohol and drug counseling along that sometime later, and it continued to serve part-time churches and helping out that way, but my main career has been in counseling for the last 30 years or longer, and I still did that up until about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's what I've done in more recent years.
In the counseling, was that under a particular church relationship, or was
No.
it another public organization?
No, this was sometimes funded programs. I was started a program in Michigan and west of Ann Arbor, Chelsea, where the hospital there, they initiated a unit, and I was the first one hired to do that. And then later, I also served as a executive director of a outpatient halfway house treatment center in Royal Oak, Michigan. And then after that, I also worked for a time for Ford Hospital and their program. And then later on, I came to Ohio because the funding was changing and all about that kind of stuff, and getting support for it. And I came to Columbus and worked in the Columbus Health Department for a time, and then through some other things that took place, Detmer was starting a program here in Troy at Detmer Hospital, and I think it was about 82 I came over and spent time there. And for a period of time, I was also head of that program at Detmer. And then getting used to moving about, I went back to Michigan for a time and worked in a program there. And then I came back to Ohio again, and for the last 10 years or so, I worked up at the Upper Valley Medical Center. So I've had an interesting career and always moving around.
Did you do any work for veterans or have veterans
No.
involved at all?
I thought of that at one time, and I'm not sure why I didn't follow up, because I probably also could have served as a chaplain there, because I've always kept that part of my credentials up. But I didn't, and I sometimes look back and wish I had done that. But that's done past now. But it would have been a good career, too.
Carl, did you have any siblings or children that would have been in military service or anything like that?
No, as I said earlier, I had, I left home at 18, and the rest of my family, my sisters by that time were all married. The sister next oldest to me, 3 years older, her husband was in the Army and stationed in San Francisco. While I was stationed in California, I visited them one time. And the others I never really kept track of, so I don't recall them ever being in service. They might have been. But, because I never been back to Kansas to live, and never really that close to any of the family members from that time on, so that's kind of where it's at.
But now, at this stage in life, is that you're a widower or you're by yourself?
I'm by myself. My wife and I split up some years ago, but I've been by myself for a
Okay.
long time.
Did you have any children?
I have one daughter. She lives in Wisconsin.
Okay.
She completed the same university college that her mother and I had attended. But we had lived in Michigan for quite a while, and she had lived there until her mother passed by, and then she moved back to Wisconsin. So,
Well, you spent 4 years in the military during the Second World War.
mhm.
What do you remember that had the most impression upon your life thereafter from that experience?
Well, I think I was involved enough in it to see, and I think a lot of us, as I said, came out of that experience thinking God and whoever else can help needs to change how the world settles differences, because it was a horrible thing. And we tend to glamorize it, I think, sometimes to take away the awfulness of it. And in my counseling since then, through Korea and Vietnam particularly, how horrible that was. I counseled a lot of fellows that had that experience. It was just horrendous. It's just beyond belief that we could even do that. Like I saw in the paper that where young man is being tried because he killed those Afghanistan families. And I had a fellow tell me that They were ordered to go into a village and shoot and kill every man, woman, and child in Vietnam. And horrible, and the terrible time they had getting over that, again and again and again. And like our current war, we don't, people, even less so because they weren't drafted. All of us, I volunteered, I don't think I mentioned that, because I thought, something needed to happen. But we get, even now, people living in Troy, I don't think have the faintest idea how awful that thing is. And I wish we could take busloads over there and let them see it for themselves, because it's horrible. And I know from a faith and biblical background, there are other ways of doing things, but we don't do it. And I just feel so sad about it for the fellows coming back. Thank goodness they're getting better care now. And but like Vietnam was awful. I still see some of those fellows around Troy, and they're still having a heck of a time with the VA. It's a little better, and others because they just feel lost. And one fellow told me the other day, he said, "How would you like to be looking out and knowing back of you somebody's looking at you?" That was his experience in Vietnam, and it's just awful. And I don't know what we're going to do to change that, but we need to do something. So that's my feelings, because it's so sad. I have a buddy that is one of my good buddies that I grew up with. His body is still on the Arizona, and I know what his parents went through. Maybe that motivated me some too, because I think it's tragic that happened.
Arizona was where?
Pearl Harbor.
Arizona was where?
Pearl Harbor.
Yes, it's still there, part of the memorial.
Well, yeah, he was on the Arizona, buried on that. So it's really sad.
Well, Carl, it's been good to have you here with us today, and I know you had some strong feelings about the wars and things, but I think at different degrees in all those. But
Yeah.
on behalf of the citizens of the United States and the Library of Congress and American Legion Post 43 and the Miami County Veterans History Project, we thank you for your service to your country and your contribution, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you. I'm sorry.